I'm going to hit the record button. So we are now officially recording.
Okay.
I can see you beautifully, sir. How's it?
All righty. Little long locks.
Yeah, same here. But first thing, whenever I can, I'm getting a haircut. That's, what can I tell you?
Yeah.
Now, I mean, how is the, hunker down, stay at home thing been affecting you? Did you have a lot of gigs canceled and stuff like that?
Yeah, my wife Tish actually got the courage to look at how many gigs we got canceled between now and September 1st, and it was 78.
Oh my God!
Right. It was really tough because
yikes!
Because my dad was born in 1920, so this was the big centennial year.
Oh my! Of course.
So a lot of people last year said, "Oh, we'd love to have the band, but we'll wait till it's the centennial in 2020." And therefore, they're all piled up. And we're talking about some big gigs like the New Orleans Jazz Festival, Hollywood Bowl, Royal Albert Hall in London.
Sweet.
Trying to work out things with the Kingdom Choir, that got famous from doing the Lady Di thing and Elton John.
Right. Yeah.
So there was a lot of big plans to celebrate. And we got a lot of celebrations under our belt in January and February. And a little bit of March when we did a tour of England, and we played a week at Ronnie Scott's. And then not only was at the end of it, we flew home on March 13th, but almost everyone in our touring group got COVID as well.
Really?
Yeah.
Everybody's okay, I hope?
Everybody's okay now. But
wow.
It wasn't easy. So we've been right in the thick of everything that's on everyone's minds,
Right. No, I totally understand. All right, well, let's talk about music and maybe we can get our minds off of all the COVID stuff and everything else.
Yeah, sure.
Ask you some things about the first piece of yours that I really became acquainted with is a piece I've never conducted, but it's your piece Interplay. In addition, I'm sure you remember that wonderful lunch we had that went on for like 4 hours in Sedona. I'll never forget that day. But the first piece of Chris Brubeck music that I really fell in love with was Interplay. Talk to me about that commission. How did that fall together? How did that happen?
Well, it came in a very weird way. I'm trying to figure out how to tell the shorter version of the story, but
take your time.
Yeah.
One thing we have here is time.
Well, going back a few steps in it, what happened is that I had played as a guest soloist with the Boston Pops, and the bass trombone player there is a guy named DeYor. He's now retired, but he asked me if I've ever written anything for trombone as a composer. And so he said, "Do you have like a tape or anything you can send to me?" I said, "Oh yeah, I think I got a tape somewhere of some orchestra I played it with." And when I sent it to him, he flipped out. I mean, he said, "Oh my God, this is so exciting. I've got to play this with the Boston Pops." And he did. And that's in the days when they did have a televised thing called Evening at Pops on PBS. Of
course. I know it well. My parents never missed Evening at Pops. Never.
Oh, man. Fantastic. If I am correct, haven't you guest conducted the Boston Pops?
I have, in fact, yes.
There we go. I wanted to brag for you.
Thank you. You're a great friend.
So anyhow, when they played that and that got televised, there were a lot of good reaction. And well, first of all, no one televises a bass trombone concerto.
Right.
And especially a new one. And so instantly, because, it would be like if Yo-Yo Ma played played a cello concerto that you wrote. Suddenly all the trombonists wanted to keep up with the top dog at the Boston Symphony. And so a lot of orchestra people played that piece. And that put me on Keith Lockhart's radar for the Boston Pops. And then he asked me to write this piece to dedicate the 100th anniversary of Symphony Hall. And that's a piece called Convergence.
Right.
And so I wrote that, and that went really well. And then Evening at Pops was still going on. He said, "We're doing a special on the violin." And we've decided, and this has nothing to do with my decision, that we're hiring Regina Carter to represent the jazz fiddle universe, or the jazz violin, and Eileen Ivers to represent the Irish tradition, and Nadia Salerno Sonnenberg to represent the classical field of that. And so Keith was saying, we're trying to think of someone that actually understood all those idioms. And then we thought, oh my God, I think Chris Brubeck played with Bill Crowfoot and a bunch of Irish musicians. And
Right.
he obviously has jazz because of his background. And we know he went to Interlochen, so he probably knows something about classical music. So they asked me, and I said, well, yeah, I mean, I was kind of thrilled. I was interested in doing it. On the other hand, I was terrified because a name like Nadja Salerno Sonnenberg, you expect she comes in with tall Prussian boots with an entourage, a la Bernstein in the later days.
Right,
something.
exactly. I've worked with Nadja. She, candidly, until you get to know her, she can be a little bit of an intimidating presence.
Okay, we worked with her, but she's really interesting. And I said, I want to have a meeting with them because I want to see what the chemistry's like. And actually, part of that was like, I want to see if I'm going to be dealing with just a nightmare of divahood here or not. And so
I wasn't going to ask.
Well,
but
as it turned out, I was really so happily surprised. And to give people a reference point, despite the name, she has the name of Nadja Salerno Sonnenberg. Excuse me. When you meet her, think of Madonna playing in A League of Their Own with Tom Hanks in the baseball movie.
Yeah.
She's that much of a Joyzy girl.
Yeah.
It's just her personality doesn't fit her name at all.
No.
And she had instant camaraderie, and I knew Regina a little bit from different jazz festivals. Eileen, I think at that point I knew a little bit. I certainly had seen her play because I was on tour in London, had a night off, and went to see one of the early days of the show Riverdance, which we asked the person that rented us a flat in London, like, what's going on this new? She said, well, there's this thing going on from Ireland that people are flipping out over.
Wow, yeah.
I gotta say, maybe if you've seen Michael Flattery hop around on TV, you think, oh, that seems like, Lord of the Dance. What is the Goody Two-Shoes doing up there? But when you see Riverdance live, the original stuff, it's incredible music. It's as loud as a Jethro Tull concert.
Right, wow.
And something so thundering and rhythmic about those people dancing, and it's a primal thing, just like bagpipes does something to me that's so primal. That kind of
like
dancing,
it shakes your bones. I mean, literally.
Yeah, it literally does. And then, and because of my background with my dad, Dave Brubeck, it's the time signature thing is crazy.
Yeah.
Blue Rondo and 9/8 and those alternating rhythms are child's play compared to this sort of Irish fiddle stuff and alternating
Right.
15 and 19 and.
Wow.
And Eileen was in there, and she was totally kicking ass. And there are some people you can hear playing, and you say, my, what a sweet sound, and don't they have incredible intonation or something? And other people you hear have different super strong suits. And Eileen's strong suit is just the way she puts her accents and the inflection of her bow. She swings her ass off. She really does. I mean, so anyhow, when I met the personalities of Eileen, who you think is Irish, but actually she's not. She's from New York. And as a kid, kept going to Ireland and winning the Irish fiddle contest, which must have really irritated all the Irish fiddle players.
Wow.
But that's how good she was. When the Irish musicians that wrote Riverdance said, who can we get that'll kick ass? We'll get the girl from New York, Eileen Ivers. So,
wow.
Yeah. So she's
so take me to that first group, that first meeting with you and all three of those soloists.
Well, what happened is that, like, for example, I remember Nadja saying, now, girls, if we're going to do this, and she obviously had the most sort of leadership out there of the three. Not that they all lead their own band, so they all got that going anyhow. But I remember one thing she said particularly, she says, that thing they always say is that when you're on television, that the camera makes you look 10 pounds heavier. That's BS. It really makes you look 20 pounds heavier. So everyone's got to lose something.
Yikes.
They all started laughing.
Yikes.
But that was just one little example, as if they had dialogue, and verbally, it was like seeing three people throw ideas and dialogue and concepts around. And it was clear to me just right away, like, oh my God, thank God, none of them is a diva.
Fantastic.
They all really respect each other's fields. I asked them, each of them had a request. Like Nadja said, Chris, I can't improvise. Don't ask me to improvise. And then Eileen would say, like, hey, man, I'm just an Irish fiddle player. Please don't write anything out of a first or second position.
Right.
Right. And then Regina said something like, I hate harmonics. Don't write harmonics for me. they each had their own thing that they were worried about, and probably more worried about it than they should have been, except for, I guess, not knows her limitations.
It's funny you should bring that up, because I wanted to ask you about that. You know, there's this long tradition in concerto compositions. I mean, the stuff between Brahms and Joachim going back and forth to you know, because Brahms was not a string player, but it's not just even a string player writing for another string player. Everything is idiomatic. How many drafts? Talk me through the process after you sent the music out. What were some of the next steps? Well, you know, this double stop doesn't work for me. Try this. How did those next steps happen?
I don't know. I've been looking up at the sky and saying, how is this possible? I don't play violin, but there were very, very few revisions. I'm talking about 98% fine.
Oh my God. Good for you.
Yeah. I don't know how it happened, actually, but you know, Nadja told me at one point, you know, hey, if I could change, let's make it up. If I could change that quick trill of the B natural to a B flat, it means I could cross the string up here. But I said, please go ahead. Yeah. And that was about it. And in fact, when I see the video of the Boston Pops, which is out there on the on YouTube, if you look up Interplay, you know, I can see that it's the original music I printed in my studio that they're using.
Wow.
And I was blessing my lucky stars. I really don't know exactly how that happened, but
well, bravo to you. Then I assume, I mean, was it a typical Pops program, one rehearsal, two short rehearsal time?
Yeah, I think there were probably two rehearsals, and I think they shot. Truth be told, I think they shot one performance. And then they said, someone in the control booth said, we had trouble with the sound. Can we shoot, you know, I think it was the ending one more time, or from letter so. And they did it in front of the audience too.
Wow, awesome.
But I was just really pleased, and I'm still friends with the director of that, a guy named Bill Cosell, who is marvelously talented about, you know, those guys are looking at your score and calling the camera shots. Right. If they know that there's going to be a guitar solo, trumpet solo, whatever. Right. On it. And it was especially gratifying because they reinforced, because of this original idea I was talking about, with it was like a ball being thrown around between three people. And that was part of the interplay. They were so playful. But I also used the old jazz conceit of most jazz tunes, traditional bebop. You know, the sax guy will play a solo, and then the piano player will play a solo, and then the bass player, and then the drummer. And then after the drummer, usually each guy plays 8 bars and then 4 bars, whatever. So I use that in this case because it was something where, you know, we could control it tightly because it was classical. You could really write everything down in terms of the structure. So I had him go from 8 bars, trading around to 3 of them, down to 4 bars, down to 2 bars, down to 1 bar. And the cameraman was like catching it all. So it was really hammering it home. But
sounds like a crack team.
Yeah, well, you know about some of these jazz entering classical tricks because of Travels in Time for 3.
Well, I mean, honestly, my career and the many commissions that I've commissioned, that is one of the projects I'm most proud of. I mean, I knew after Spontaneous Combustion, really, to be honest with you, I knew after Interplay, you were the guy. And they, you know, Time for 3 guys who I love, they were pursuing other composers who wrote wonderful works, but I'm like, you need who can really capture. That's why my suggestion was that you guys get together, drink a little too much, and jam.
And I want your audience to know that there's not many conductors that make that kind of suggestion. But
you know what? I didn't have to even say drink too much. I think it was just implied. But that was so satisfying for me. Talk a little bit about those jam sessions. Talk a little about the journey of Travels in Time for 3.
Yeah, well, first of all, we have to back up. And you mentioned Spontaneous Combustion, but we should say that was a concerto that you were the guy behind getting that going too, up in Anchorage.
Yep.
And I think it's because, well, how did it go? Is it because you had heard Nick play Interplay? Durango?
First couple of times I worked with Nick, it was Red Violin Suite. And then he asked as an encore in Flagstaff. he started doing, you know, the time for three violin jam thing that they did so brilliantly. And he said, asked me, he said, okay, if I do an encore like that? I said, okay, that's magnificent. Yes. And he said, could we write out a few chords, just a little simple groove for the orchestra he could improvise over? So it's like, all right, we've got lightning in a bottle here. And then I saw a PBS special on the Philly Orchestra, and I saw Zach. I'm like, that's a blonde Nick Kendall. Boom, not long thereafter, Time for Three is blasting forth, taking off like a rocket to another planet. I'm like, okay, somebody needs to write a really great orchestral piece that harnesses this incredible energy, and you were that guy.
Yeah, so in Spontaneous Combustion, and I'm very, very proud of that piece. Sometimes I listen to it, and I'll go like, who wrote that? You know,
who wrote that?
But that was another combination of. In fact, it might be, you know, when people say, Chris, what's your technique or composition style? Well, one is I just go exploring, but before I do that, it's like getting together. Like Nick stayed in my house for 3 days, and we jammed.
Right.
And I recorded a lot of the jamming because, you know, I don't know exactly. I'm not a violinist. And then I'd hear him do stuff, and I'd tape it. And I remember after our first time getting together for 3 days, and I had like 28 what I called really great creative violins. And so a lot of times I think you can say the word, what is a composer? I think one good definition that you'll never see anywhere is a sound organizer, you know? So, I took these different things, and I thought, well, the most exciting things should go in the last movement. So I sort of shuffled these little tape jams, and then this is an idea for the exposition, and then the second movement, which you'll recall, is a very slow adagio. That was literally my wife Tish was making lunch for us while we were jamming, and I was playing a keyboard that had orchestral sound, and Nick was kind of leading and was very passionate and rubato. And we looked at each other when we were through about 8 minutes later, and we're going like, holy cow, what just happened? Because we felt like it had just fallen on our ears, our brains out of the sky. I remember Tish came in and said, hey, lunch is ready. What was that piece you guys were playing? You know, and it was like literally out of the sky. And at that point, I had enough compositions under my belt. And I said, I'm going to try something maybe insane, but courageous. I'm going to really try to almost leave this verbatim like it fell out of the sky.
Wow.
You know, I had to do more orchestrations and stuff, but I would say it's like was 80% of what happened. Wow. And with the other movements, you know, there was more hard work involved. But I want to back up because your listenership will, I think, find this funny. The first time that Nick and I ever got together was probably after maybe a year and a half to 2 years of you trying to get us together. And we happened to be at the same festival of music that included jazz and classical in Saratoga Springs, New York. And then finally, like, we're in the same town. We got to finally get together like Randy asked us to. We get together, and we're in a bar, and we're drinking beers. And I say, well, Nick, you know, I want to get to know, I mean, your idea for a violin concerto, I know you have marvelous abilities, or Randy wouldn't have recommended you so much. Like, so what do you want to do? How far out do you want to get? And he said, well, you know, like, I really want to, you know, think out of the box. And so I just said, literally off the top of my head, like, you mean, like, if you started from the back of the auditorium instead of on stage, that would be cool. He went, I love it. And that is literally how this piece starts. He does start from the back of the auditorium.
Right.
And then to keep it really freaky, as one of the last tricks up this sleeve, Nick loves to play drums, which no violinist loves to do. So he actually comes out, and the stagehand brings out like a timbale set, and he plays a drum solo. And then he goes into the last hardest 3 minutes of the playing, very chromatic, difficult playing. You think it would mess up his chops, and he still loves doing that. So anyhow.
I remember both of you saying, you know, do you think this drum thing is okay? I'm like, okay, if you can do it. This is showbiz, man. We're out to entertain. That's our life. You know what I'm saying? So yeah, it's electrifying. Like, cool.
Yeah. Well, it was. And now to get back to your original question. So because that piece was so much fun, and it was great to do it with you in Anchorage, then Nick started convincing his other Time for Three, Renan Meyer on bass, and at that point, Zach Depew, that, you know, you guys are crazy not to have Chris write a piece for us. So we did the same method. Let's hang out. I came down to Philadelphia. And a lot of it was jamming. I was taping jamming. But for example, the second movement, I think it's called Irish Folk and Odd Times, was a result of Zach playing an Irish tune, but we were jamming in 15 while he stayed in 4. And we were like, we all looked at each other like, wow, that's really cool. You know, if someone could organize that mess, that would be neat. And so that was the basis for that movement, for example. And it's really hard. I'm sure that's a hard-ass piece to conduct.
No, I mean, you know, I think any great piece of music, you know, if a conductor does their homework and really learns it, you know, like the music just kind of carries you. So the changing meter in Travels in Time for 3 is just so organic that I've never had any trouble with it.
I know most players that I talk to in the orchestra usually come up to me and say, I really hated this at first. I had to count so much. But there's a point where it flips into being natural. And I think that's another way of saying what you're saying. There is a naturalness to the music that makes it work, despite the fact you have to think a lot and it crosses over.
Well, you have to think it first. It takes some practice. But once you get it, it's like, oh, this just flows. It just fits.
And I have to give credit where credit is due, because I think of this often when I hear this piece, is that I thought I was finished, and I sent you like a finale synth demo, and you said the ending ought to be even bigger. And I really thought to myself, like, is he crazy? How much bigger can it get? But, you know, you motivated me to like, okay, I'll see if I can make it bigger. And that's one of the things that really, you know, makes this piece have such an impact, you know, because it just takes off. And I got to say, every time I hear it, I think of you. And I'll tell you, one of the zeniths of it, besides the premiere, was playing Time for 3, playing that piece with the BBC Orchestra at Royal Albert Hall, which is sort of like, it's sort of beyond Carnegie Hall in terms of a legendary place. You know, if you would say, someday I want to grow up and be a composer, and, you know, if you're a pianist, maybe
exactly.
Exactly. And I think that damn place seats 6,000 people, or stands.
It's huge. It's huge.
And I think like 2,500 people stand, like the old Shakespearean things. They don't have chairs on the bottom floor. And then they have a lot of balconies. And you should have heard the roar, you know, because just when you think, you know, you've hit the climax of this exciting piece, it's been pushing forward, then there's this last sort of, you know, kind of Russians on amphetamines thing that happens at the end. And the crowd just like went crazy, you know, and anyhow, it's just great. So for those listening and checking out this conversation, this is not a superficial relationship that Randy and I have for many musical things over the years.
Well, I mean, and you're also the sort of composer, since you come from the world of jazz, which is, you know, a little bit different than classical, where I can say, you know what, you know, I want the audience to jump to their feet. Can you write me an ending that does that? And then you can say, all right, and you know, the ending is electrifying. And, you know, I mean, I do think of myself as in the field of entertainment, and so a thing like this, which was so brilliantly written by you and performed by the Time for 3 guys, I wanted a guaranteed jump to your feet ending, and God bless you, delivered in spades. I'm gonna go. I mean, obviously, you grew up literally under Dave's piano. Thinking back to your childhood and the many artists that came in and out of your home, who are the artists, you know, who really caught your attention and contributed to, you know, the Chris Brubeck that you are? Obviously your father, but who else?
Well, actually, everyone in the famous classic quartet. Paul Desmond for his beautiful lyricism. Like when I play trombone, and I still do, I'm not someone, well, part of it is my taste, and part of it is my ability. Like, I'm not someone that has amazing technical chops. There are jazz players like the late Bill Watrous, and almost anyone in the Lincoln Center Jazz Orchestra right now. They have like astounding technique. But because of growing up hearing Paul, I just grew up with a sensibility that you don't have to play a lot of notes to do something worthwhile. It's really, the the melodic thing. The famous guitarist Jim Hall said that Paul Desmond was the only guy he's ever known that could improvise a melody on his choruses that was more beautiful than the original melody that the composer wrote.
Wow.
Just almost always thinking, and this is especially rare in the age of Charlie Parker, because basically all jazz players wanted to play 1,000 amazing notes per bar. And in fact, a book was written about Paul Desmond, and it has letters that were discovered in a diary of his, where he very consciously said, you know, Charlie Parker's fantastic and everyone's moving that direction, but I'm not going to. And when you look back at all those times, you can tell who Paul Desmond is in a second with his sound. And then there's a lot of great players, and it's a little hard, and, you know, you can tell who Charlie Parker is in a second.
Yeah.
But, you know, there are, you know, hundreds of people that sound, you can say, oh, they're disciples of Charlie Parker and they sound in that direction. And I don't know if I've heard maybe one or two people that sound a little bit like Paul. Sometimes they'll do a tribute record and where they're really making an effort to do it. And then with Gene Wright, I'm a bass player too. So I listened a lot to, basically, he was a very simple kind of bass player. He came out of the Count Basie band doing stuff with them. So his duties as a bass player were not in the at that point in jazz, Scott LaFaro, Charlie Mingus, these people were becoming more soloistic. And it was like, that's not my gig. My gig is to be the supportive harmonic foundation, keep track of roots and keep the time. Actually, the most restricted person in a traditional jazz quartet is the bass player. The drummer is more free when you get into more bebop drumming. And then Joe Morello came along, and he was just an unbelievable player. And so I would, as you mentioned earlier, crawl under the piano, because then I couldn't be in anyone's way, and listen to the group play. And it was like heaven to hear those guys.
Yeah.
And then later on in my life, I was very fortunate because I did quite a few gigs with Jerry Mulligan.
I didn't know that.
Oh, yeah. He, after the classic quartet broke up in 1967, I think it was, Dave did that to spend more time composing and more time being at home. But within a year of having broken up the quartet, George Wein, the originator and supervisor of the Newport Jazz Festival, said, "Hey, Dave, you know, Jerry Mulligan lives right in Connecticut too. You and Jerry would be great together." It was like you putting me together with Nick Kendall. He said, "You guys really should throw a group together. Everyone would love to hear you two guys play together. You never really have."
Wow.
So they did, along with a drummer named Alan Dawson and a bass player named Jack Six. And right away, people went nuts. So that became a group that didn't work as crazily as much as Dave's. But, you know, it worked a significant amount, maybe 50 gigs a year. And they had quite a relationship for quite a long time. And Jerry was also interested in writing for orchestra. So he respected the fact
I actually conducted a Pops concert with Jerry Mulligan, I don't know, 30 years ago with the National Symphony. And in all naked honesty, as blown away as I was by the concert, I didn't fully understand who he was, what a giant he was. But I'll never forget it. And what a sweet, wonderful, nice guy.
Well, that's great because, you know, I've seen him when he isn't exactly that definition.
Oh, is that right? Okay.
But
he was older around then.
But when he is in the mood to be a sweet, wonderful, nice guy, he's fantastic. Obviously a genius, super intelligent. Yeah. And with his writing, did you do a piece that he wrote called Dragonfly or something like that?
Maybe. It was 30-some years ago, and I remember precious little about it other than that it kind of blew me away at the time.
Yeah. I remember one thing particularly well is that for some reason, once we did the Montreal Jazz Festival is like the biggest jazz festival in the world now, I think. And we had a gig where it was Dave, Jerry Mulligan, my brother Dan on drums, and me on bass. And we played Take 5, and we fell into this thing where instead of the standard famous beat, jing, 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 Dan started playing as if he were a drummer from New Orleans. Sort of like, dum, 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 and we were playing along. And then I thought, like, oh man, this could go both ways. Jerry could be so furious at us, and he would tell us if he didn't dig what was happening.
Yeah.
And so we had this funky thing, and everyone played different because it was funky. And,
Sure.
you know, they played that tune a million times. So, like, to have it a different approach. When we got off stage, I remember Jerry turned around with a big grin on his face, gave us a hug and said, "Where have you guys been all my life?" Thank God. That was such a happy surprise, you know.
Can I ask you a dumb question?
No.
If this is a stereotype, but in my experience, every classical soloist I've known is nervous to perform. Every rock pop soloist I've known is nervous to perform, but very few of the jazz musicians I've known are nervous to perform. Do you agree that that's the case? And if so, why?
I think it depends on the player. In my case, when I'm playing with a group, I don't feel as naked, as it were. If in the group, if we know the arrangements and we know what we're doing, and I have a level of trust, like for example, the Brubeck Brothers Quartet is me on bass and trombone, Dan on drums, a fellow named Chuck Lamb on piano, and Mike D'Amico on guitar. So we go out there, and sometimes, even if we haven't played for a while, like for 2.5 months or something, we go out and I just say, I know some magic's going to happen. And I'm not really nervous about that. And then it's just a wonderful feeling. When I go out as a trombone soloist and play with an orchestra, I am somewhat nervous. And part of that is, for me as a trombonist, is I have certain days like where my high chops are firing on all cylinders. And then I have other days and I can't figure out how to control it. I have other days. Yeah. So, like, you know, part of it is practice. You know, if I have a concerto coming up, I'm saying, okay, I'm going to do 2 hours a day. And, but, you know, like when it comes to playing a C above a middle C, like that to me isn't a complete given.
Yeah, no, that's the way upper reach, obviously, the register. I guess I've always assumed the reason is that if you're playing with other jazz musicians who you know and trust, if anything happens, everybody will go with it. But if you're playing concerto with an orchestra, if something goes wrong, nobody's going to know how to improvise their way out of it. It's on the page or it isn't.
Right. And my wife always points out that you're actually at a disadvantage because you wrote the piece you're playing, that if something goes wrong in the orchestra, you're hypersensitive to it. I mean, and it's really all about concentration. It's sort of like driving good on the road and your kid drops a hot French fry in your leg in shorts or something. You know, it's like distraction. And it's so much about, like, I'll be telling myself, you know, Chris, keep your mind on it, you know, and I still use music quite a bit because it sort of trains your mind and centers it on the exact task at hand. Although I do know the piece by heart, and I try to break away too. But, you know, there's other times where you're playing and like, wow, this is all working out great, you know, so that's a lot of fun then.
Awesome. I know you want to talk a little bit about your new piece, Affinity, which I love.
Oh, thanks, man.
Tell us a little bit about it.
Well, ever since that piece we first talked about, Interplay for 3 Violins and Orchestra, Sharon Isbin thought that I had something in me as a composer that she really wanted to tap. So I guess you could say maybe for 15 years or something, she kept trying to come up with a scenario where she could get funding to commission me to write a piece. And one thing for sure about Sharon Isbin is that already, like if she were to, you know, to pass away for some reason instantly, her legacy is already set, is that no one has commissioned more new works for guitar. And every guitarist around, you know, no matter how good they are, would give her that throne. She's the queen of having done that, or king, you know, I mean, just no one's done it as much. So finally a situation, which I won't go into, came up where some funds opened up. And she talked to this person. Well, actually, I'll talk about it a little bit because it's funny. It was someone who wanted to contribute funds for commission to an orchestra. And it was mishandled by the executives of the orchestra so badly that she sort of said, like, hey, I don't want to mess with you guys anymore. And happened to meet Sharon shortly thereafter. They were sitting together at like a patrons dinner. And she was saying, you know, I used to play guitar in college and I've always wondered about funding a wonderful new concerto. And Sharon goes like, after 15 years, my angel has appeared, you know?
Awesome.
So that was the beginning of it. And I worked with Sharon and someone that you know too, Elizabeth Schultz.
Of course.
Who conducted the premiere.
Love both of them.
Yeah. And I was doing finale demos and stuff. And one thing that's kind of interesting and nice about it, and we had a lot of meetings, well, not a lot, but I would say 3 meetings in New York where I was playing a lot of my music for Sharon. She was telling me, you know, what she really hoped to achieve, because I didn't know if she wanted quasi-classical, quasi-jazz. Then we realized it was like sort of this mixture of everything. So when I sent her my first demo, she said, I really love the opening. I really love the end. And I'd written a very pretty adagio section. And she said to me, the only thing I got to say honestly is I don't super love the adagio section. I just don't know if it's going to be as guitaristic as a slow movement could be. And she said, I know your father just passed away, and I'm really curious, you know, if you'd be interested in sort of paying homage to him by perhaps using a theme that he wrote, if you thought there was one that was particularly guitaristic. And I was literally in my father's house that was empty at that point because his grand piano was there, looking out these giant 2-story windows, and it was in the fall. And when we were talking in the phone, all of a sudden a leaf broke off that was like flaming orange and just swirled and twisted and landed in the river. Wow. And Dave wrote this beautiful tune called Autumn. And I thought like, oh, this could be a wink and a sign. And then I remembered like, God, that would be really guitaristic. And so like one day later, I sent her a string realization on finale and a rearrangement of that melody and how it went, and I had inserted it and she flipped out. She completely loved it. And you've heard it. I mean, it is very guitaristic.
Beautiful. It's beautiful.
And really harkens back. I mean, you could argue, I suppose, if I was putting myself up to, you know, whatever it means to be a 21st century composer, maybe people say, oh, it's so traditional. But, you know, I'm getting old enough. Hey, man, if it's music and it works, I don't care what you know,
my friend, there are so many composers who've turned that corner and are done trying to alienate and confuse and are back to the real function of our art form, which is to move the audience.
Yeah.
Chance, do you have your horn handy? Do you want to improvise a minute or two of something delicious for us?
Oh my God, I forgot that maybe I was supposed to do that. Well, my
is
horn
it handy or not?
It's literally not. I mean, it's like
okay, fine, not to worry.
Yeah, okay.
Maybe if there's something online, I could just put out there for our viewers. Watch this. I can send them to the Is there YouTube video of Affinity? Oh yeah, the Detroit Symphony.
The Detroit Symphony.
They posted everything. Okay, yeah, I can send them to that.
Yeah, normally there wouldn't be, but it's COVID bonus.
Yeah, exactly. One final question. How have you seen jazz change during your lifetime?
Well, I would say what's changed during my lifetime is that when I was first going out in my dad's group, let's say in the 70s, sometimes I'd be lucky enough to be riding on a bus that would have our group plus Count Basie's group plus, maybe Joe Zawinul and some people pre-Weather Report and Horace Silver, just a collection of people from festivals. And you would hear the old timers talk. And so much of it was an oral tradition. Basically, when they came up, you couldn't go to a school to learn how to play jazz.
No.
And then, thankfully, like New England Conservatory and Gunther Schuller, who came out of the classical tradition as a French horn player and conductor.
I know him quite well.
Oh, great. So it was like, okay, this is legitimate, this music. And he made it part of the curriculum, a legitimate curriculum in New England Conservatory. And then ultimately Juilliard did. Most of the jazz at Lincoln Center guys are connected with Juilliard. So as it got respected, the good news is there was all this different methodology of how to become a jazz player. And so people can kind of learn more intellectually, not just by by the aural, A-U-R-A-L, tradition of it. On the other hand, I've heard a lot of these old timers, they would say, like, oh, these kids coming up, man, they play a lot of notes and they got a lot of crazy harmonic ideas, but I don't know if they're saying anything. And it comes back to what you just said about composers, you know, are they moving people with what they're playing? And, you know, the best of the younger players are doing both. And right now, when you have a situation where there's no teaching going on, no COVID, COVID has canceled everything. Thank God they can get lessons all over the world on YouTube and just learn from listening to the real masters of it, Sonny Rollins or John Coltrane or Charlie Parker. They can do that kind of thing. So I'm basically just so thrilled that in our sort of hip hop dominated culture, I'll meet these kids that God knows why, but they love jazz. They're deeply into it, and they're good young players, and they are not swayed by the popular culture of the time. They know that, you know, I'm sure I'm insulting some people, but compared to the complexity of a great jazz player, you know, hip hop and rap is like
rock, whatever.
Well, it's the most creative rock, but it's not the complexity of jazz or classical music. And also on the flip side of this coin, I want to say that it's been great now when I get to play with orchestras, which I hope to God I get to play with them again. What's fantastic is that all the players that are, let's say, between 30 and 50, or younger than 50, they've all gone to Juilliard and New England Conservatory instead of thinking, who are these weird jazz people? Screw them. I don't want anything to do with them. They were their roommates, and they went to school together, and they played on each other's recitals. And there's such a deeper respect from the classical side for jazz, because they're saying, like, these guys have the chops, they have the sound, and they can make stuff up as they go. You know?
Can you get your face a little bit more in the center of the image by any chance?
Yes.
Do you think that, I have my own strong opinions about this, but do you think that jazz is the classical music born in America?
Wow. That's a deep question. I don't know. Is it because, there's enough great American classical music that I don't want to take away from that. I kind of think that jazz is what it is, but I know you're asking that question being aware of my dad's efforts with Leonard Bernstein to integrate, I said that all funny, integrate the classical world and the jazz world. And part of that dates back to, my dad would always say, originally classical music, Mozart and Bach and people like that, they would improvise. There were sections where they would, and it sort of it fell out. I guess post Beethoven, it sort of fell out of classical music.
Around there, yes.
But it was always there as part of it, and the idea of figured bass, which a lot of Baroque musicians could improvise. Right. In a way, that was so much like, here's the chorus to all the things you are. And you could probably get through a performance with a lot of good improvisers on figured bass. It might not be the world's most organized, but it's so much the same concept.
It is.
So I think it's an interrelationship, and there are some people, there's quite a few people that are great jazz players and classical, and they go out and play Rhapsody in Blue or the Gershwin Piano Concerto or something, and they really do go into improvisation, and they can mix it up. So my father always hoped that those two traditions would reintegrate.
So do I. And I think there's something completely lost, because I love to sit down at the piano and improvise. It's a thing I do always by myself. It's not anything but it's like, I'm depressed, I'm angry, I'm pissed off. I'm just gonna sit down and pour it all. I'm bang, really harsh bass notes and blah, 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 blah. And I think that, and a lot of, in terms of my own composition, that's how ideas come to me. Same with, do you ever just sit down at the keyboard and just start jamming? It's like, oh yeah, this works. Boom, let's get this down.
Yeah, sometimes it's like that. I always say to my wife, I'm going down to my studio to explore. And
it's great.
We have, as composers, we have to be our own editors. If you're too hypercritical, then you'll literally never write a bar.
That's right.
Usually I write at night and I get going until I feel like I'm going to fall asleep, and I'll just see how I feel about it tomorrow. And then you check it out. And if you're lucky, you'll go like, well, whatever my muse is, it didn't completely fail me. This makes sense. And also, when I write something, I'm always trying to make it better, whether, there's different ideas or chord substitutions or harmonic ways of polishing it up.
When do you know it's done?
Usually when the deadline arrives, and it better be done.
Spoken like a true musician. When I get the paycheck, right?
Well, you can work on it forever, but then there's finally a point where you just got to say, hey, reality is kicking in. Like I had a piece commissioned by the New England Conservatory of Music for the Wind Ensemble, the 50th anniversary of their band. So I consider that a big honor. And you probably know Charles Peltz.
I know the name.
He's the conductor up there of that organization, and he really wanted me to write it. So I was writing and writing and writing, and I was writing until I went on the tour in England in March. And it's like, I have to go to the airport now, so I guess I better be finished, because otherwise the copyists couldn't finish it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like you can always go back and, right. You can always double check forever, but I just knew like that had to be the end of it. And on the other hand, I just wrote a big piece that was a commission that premiered in Switzerland called Mary Magdalene and the Garden Dweller. And
wow.
Yeah, it's for chorus and orchestra and jazz group and soloists. And it's like about 50 minutes long. But my wife Tish said, look, you got to get serious. You got to write this. You're on tour so much. You're going to run out of time. So I am going to take our grandchildren and our daughter, and we're going to Florida. And you're going to be all alone for a week. And you'd better write this piece. The funny thing about it is she was so wise, because it happened to be the week before Easter. And, it's the story of when after the tomb stone rolls away and Jesus manifests as a gardener, and Mary Magdalene sees him and doesn't realize who he is at first, and all that kind of thing. And it's all biblical text. And I was writing and writing and just going through the text, writing melodies and chords. And it just was the absolute right time, because I really finished it on Easter Sunday. And often people, I don't know how long it takes to write pieces. I don't really know. But this particular one I know, because it was literally that week ending up on that. And when I say write it, what I meant is that everything had a melody, everything had chords. And then there's the grunt work in the trenches of taking chicken scratch, turning into finale and orchestrating.
Right, exactly. I know only too well.
Yes, but you probably know that feeling when you feel like you're connected to some outside thing that's feeding you ideas.
No question. Nobody knows what that is. Creativity, that spark that moves you. And then the other thing that I often describe as a composer myself is, once you've created this entity, it's almost like it's pulling you now. Do you have that feeling? Like wants to go. It's like, I'm not controlling this piece anymore. These themes that I've written are now controlling me.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. And it's even like, I'm tired, I'm going to bed. And when you're really in the groove, you wake up and like, I can't wait to give this thing more juice. It's calling to me down in the basement, come feed me, feed me. It's like a big plant in Little Shop of Horrors,
That's true. And I mean, like I can't fall asleep. And I started just keeping manuscript paper next to the bed, and Heidi's looking over, what the hell are you doing? But yeah, I mean, that's an amazing feeling, and it's so satisfying. On this blank page, now there's something, and before there wasn't, and it's alive, and I can't wait to hear it. And, it's very satisfying.
Well, and the other thing about it is like you say, it's a piece of paper, it's an idea, but it even becomes more of a reality than that. Like I was telling a photographer a couple of days ago, my father and I wrote a piece together called Ansel Adams America. I can't remember. Have you done that too?
A couple times.
Oh, there we go. Okay. So why I bring it up is that the context of it's just an idea. And then I read his autobiography and I got more connected to the man. So then I got Dave involved with it, convinced him he should do it. Then we wrote this thing together. Then the Monterey Symphony decides they're going to play 3 performances of it. And I'm at the reception before the first performance, and I'm on this beautiful big deck overlooking a cove on the Pacific Ocean, right near the the famous, lonely pines, the cypress tree that you see all the photographs of. And I turn around and they say, would you like to see what it looks like inside? So I go inside, and it's Ansel Adams' son who is showing me Ansel Adams' studio, because that's whose house we were at. And it's like, when you just start by writing an idea, and then you're moving into a different reality. And I'm sure that's happened to you before too. I mean, it takes you on to places you didn't imagine you were going to go.
That's right.
From the abstract to the real.
Right. To the tangible. Just and flutters of sound, and now it's actually something.
Yeah. It's amazing.
You know what? Let's end it right there.
Okay.
I so appreciate you doing this. We'll have this up on the web for my 3 orchestras, and I think I'll just throw up a link to Affinity with the Detroit Symphony now that everybody can watch it. Give my love to Tish. Thank you so much for doing this. It's a huge help, and I guess I appreciate that you orchestrated Affinity for such a manageable size group. Like I said, I don't know if we can afford Sharon, but we'll see.
Well, the main thing is I just wanted you to hear it, and I'm excited. You know how hard it is to get a record out of an orchestral thing, and now it's really out there.
That's great. That's a big. I mean, there's obviously mostly negative to COVID, but the fact that they threw all this material up on the web is very helpful.
Yeah.
All right, my friend. I will talk to you soon. Thank you once again so much for doing this. What an absolute pleasure.
Oh, well, thank you, and I hope we get to work